Should Portland abandon its 106-year-old commission form of government? That's a question being put forth by the City Club of Portland. In February 2019, City Club published a report which deeply examined the historical legacy of the current commission system. The report was subsequently discussed in a November 2019 article in the Portland Mercury, which stated that voters may be given the chance to decide on this issue in the November 2020 election, although there are some other indications that this timeline may be overly ambitious. The Mercury article provides some historical context. In short, Portland is the only large city to still use the commission form of government. The system used to be more widespread in the early 20th century, but apparently it led to rampant corruption and was mostly replaced by a district-based council-manager structure. The City Club report specifically cited a number of troubling metrics with regard to the representativeness of the current system. Portland's leadership has been dominated by white males. 4 of its 5 commissioners live west of the river, and it has an extremely low ratio of elected representatives to voters. To remedy this, the City Club report suggests 3 key changes. 1. Replace the commission form of government with a modified council-manager form of government. The mayor would serve as the chair of the city council, as is now the case, and would also supervise the work of the city manager. The city's day-to-day bureaucratic administrative functions would be handled by a professional, non-political city manager, whose function is to effectively implement the policies and budgets approved by the council. 2. Increase the size of the city council, meaning 8 to 12 city councilors. 3. Change how city council members are elected. Instead of electing all city council members on an at-large basis, they recommend switching to district-based elections, preferably with multiple members per district. For example, 3 districts each electing 3 members of the city council. The report also examines various alternative voting methods and recommends transitioning to some form of instant runoff voting system, one in which there would be a single election in November rather than the current 2-stage May and November system. This is all subject to further research. Now, this last point is the one I think is the most interesting and potentially transformative. See, Portland currently uses the standard choose one system of voting, called plurality voting or first past the post. And while it's by far the most common system used in the US, it's generally considered by political scientists to be the worst system on Earth. In a 2010 workshop convened by the London School of Economics, a group of 22 experts in math and political science evaluated 18 different voting methods and found plurality voting to be the worst. Not a single attendee considered it to be supportable. So why is this? What's so bad about the way Portland currently votes? In a word, it's the classic spoiler dilemma. We can use the ice cream metaphor to visualize it. Let's say we have a huge 65% majority who favors chocolate ice cream over strawberry ice cream. But there are 2 different varieties of chocolate. Some voters choose chocolate fudge, while others choose chocolate almond. The result can end up being clearly unrepresentative. Chocolate paradoxically loses because we have 2 versions of it. The reality is that both types of chocolate voters would have predominantly taken the alternative variety of chocolate over strawberry. But since they could only vote for one option, they had no way to say so on their ballot. This is exactly the conundrum voters often face when deciding whether to vote for a non-traditional or third-party candidate. Should you vote for who you really like, or should you try to consolidate your vote on the candidate who appears to be the most electable in the hopes of at least avoiding your worst-case scenario? Well, it turns out there are some modern alternative voting methods that can solve this problem. One of them is called star voting, and it was invented right here in Oregon in 2014. STAR stands for Score Then Automatic Runoff. Instead of forcing you to pick just one candidate, star voting lets you score the candidates with a 0 to 5 rating, just like a satisfaction survey. You get to say how satisfied you would be if any of the given candidates were to win the office. The finalists are the two candidates with the best total score, and the winner is the one preferred by the majority. But unlike a traditional top two runoff election, star voting doesn't require an expensive and time-consuming trip back to the polls, since we already know, based on your ratings, which of the finalists you prefer. This was a point specifically mentioned by the City Club report, which said they're interested in a system that allows the entire election to take place on a single day, rather than in the familiar two-round May and November voting system. Here's a simple example of how star voting would work. We have 6 candidates, and the voter rates the ones she cares about. She leaves 2 of them blank, so they just get a 0 by default. The finalists are Andrew and Edith, as they clearly have the most points overall. This voter scored Andrew a 4 and Edith a 1, so this vote goes to Andrew in the automatic top 2 runoff. In this example, Andrew wins with a 53% majority. You can actually visit the star.vote website and see lots of different star voting polls that various people have created and shared. Here's one where Andrew Yang Gang have apparently showed up in force. The top 2 highest rated candidates are Yang and Sanders. And on the right, you can see the majority preference between them. This has the really nice quality that even the losers get transparency into their true support. And note that the system always completes in just 2 rounds, which makes it much simpler to administer than the more antiquated ranking-based systems that have been historically used, in which the voter provides a 1, 2, 3 ordering of the candidates. You may have heard of these by the name instant runoff voting or ranked choice voting. Portland also used to use a ranking system called Buckland voting starting in 1913, but it was repealed only a few years later. This quick repeal scenario has historically been the case with rank order systems throughout U.S. history, and it was a major influence on the simplified 2-round limit and ratings instead of rankings approach taken with the design of star voting. There has also been some really groundbreaking analysis in recent years based on computerized election simulations performed by a Harvard statistics PhD named Jameson Quinn, who co-founded the Center for Election Science. The results here compare star voting on a 0 to 10 scale, row 13, to instant runoff voting, or IRV, row 5. If you go to this website and check out the various scenarios, it's really quite impressive. Star voting outperforms IRV in every single scenario, whether the voters are honest or tactical in their behavior. But in the event that even the simplified star voting approach is politically unpalatable, there's still a great option worth considering. Remember that study by the London School of Economics? We said that the current system was the worst of the 18 systems they studied, but the best was a system called approval voting. We don't know what they would have thought of star voting because it hadn't been invented yet, but approval voting seems to have really impressed those experts with its simplicity. Approval voting uses the same ballot as plurality voting, but allows the voter to support any number of candidates. Here you can see a side-by-side comparison of plurality voting on the left and approval voting on the right. This voter likes all 4 superheroes, and thus supports them all, effectively casting a vote against Lex Luthor, the supervillain. In 2018, approval voting was adopted by a 64% landslide majority in Fargo, North Dakota, and will be used for their June 2020 City Council race. There's also a ballot initiative in the works to bring approval voting to St. Louis, Missouri, and polling shows it will pass by approximately a 70% majority. Now, while it may seem that the only major benefit of approval voting is its simplicity, for instance, no need to upgrade voting machines to support a ranked ballot, it surprisingly turns out to actually outperform the more complicated 1, 2, 3 ranking system. You can see that if we go back and look at row 8 in the chart that we previously looked at. You may notice that row 8 is labeled score 0 to 1, and that's because, interestingly enough, approval voting is technically, mathematically speaking, what you would get if you compressed the 0 to 5 score range of star voting down to a binary 0 to 1 range. So it's actually not such a surprise that these systems both perform so well. But the most esoteric issue in the report by far was the subject of proportional representation. Most modern democracies use some form of PR for their legislative bodies. The idea here is that political factions should win a number of seats which is roughly proportional to the number of votes they got. This is easiest to understand in the context of political parties. If, say, the Blue Party got 20% of the vote and there are 60 seats, then they should be awarded 12 seats, as we see in this diagram. The City Club report gives a nod to a hybrid system, in which there are geographical districts, but each of them elects, say, 3 candidates, thus allowing for some amount of proportional representation. But note, this doesn't have to mean political parties. There are forms of PR, such as the Single Transferable Vote, or STV system used in Australia and Ireland, in which the voters express a preference for candidates, not parties. A reweighting system is then applied to each ballot to ensure that the next candidate elected in each district is more influenced by those voters who haven't yet gotten representation. It turns out, though, that if you apply a similar reweighting formula to star voting, you get the same effect, and you guessed it, it's simpler than using 1, 2, 3 ordered ranking. This system has previously gone by the name Reweighted Range Voting, or RRV, and it turns out the system was unanimously adopted by the City Council and Mayor of Berkeley, California a few years ago. But rather than using it to elect people, they use it to decide which bills to study and bring forward for a vote. The proportionality of the system was desired because it ensured that minority viewpoints wouldn't be stamped out by the majority. And so far, it appears to be working quite well. And again, if you want the ultimate in simplicity, you can apply this proportional weighting to the approval voting method. Then it becomes just about the simplest proportional system there is. After each winner is declared, all the ballots have their power divided by the number of approved winners plus 1. So if someone you approved wins, your vote now has half as much power. If a second person you approved wins, your vote has 1/3 as much power, and so on. It's an extremely simple system. This reweighting is the key ingredient of proportional representation. Thanks for watching, and if you want to learn more, I encourage you to head on over to equal.vote and join the conversation.